Many of the cases I've covered have been cases of cockwombles who seek to control their significant others or the object of their affections. Then, well, lose control when they lose control. The reason for this is that they make up a relatively large proportion of murders. But it's important to shine a light on domestic violence. For many years it was a taboo subject, and sometimes even condoned and justified. And it's only in relatively recent times that the stigma and the shroud of secrecy has been lifted to the point that we now hear of these cases and are rightly sickened by them. When one person feels they have the right to inflict such cruelty and brutality on another human, let alone someone that they profess to love, it becomes an indictment on that person, on men, since the majority, but not all, perpetrators are men, and indeed an indictment on the human race in all its vindictive tendencies. Yes, these people are in a minority, but their actions are so heinous and so shocking that it casts a stain on our entire species. Today's case is no exception, with a young mum of 3 being subjected to unimaginable cruelty before the perpetrator tries very, very badly to pull the wool over the eyes of investigators. This is the wretched case of Kelly Ann Case, and this is Murder of Crows. In 2019, young mother Kelly Ann Case was going through a difficult time. Her 3 children had been removed from her care by social services. She was vulnerable and had, as we so often see, turned to drugs and alcohol as a means of trying to hide from the turbulence of her world. But just because someone is struggling and under the influence, it does not give other people carte blanche to take advantage of them. It makes me sad to have to say that, but it happens so often that there are plenty of people who are more than willing to do just that. which is just plain reprehensible. It was July the 30th, 2019, and Kelly was having an evening at her home on Grange Crescent in Gosport on the south coast of England, and she was with friends. Now, these friends were Will Vallender and Brendan Rowan Davis. I say friends, but more specifically, Rowan Davis and Vallender were close friends, and Vallender was in a sexual relationship with Kelly. And that's how the three came to be spending the evening together on that perfectly normal Tuesday evening. As I say, a perfectly normal night by their standards, with the three drinking vodka and taking cocaine. As you do. Not casting aspersions, it just seems really alien to me. But a glitch in the matrix came when Rowan Davis admitted his attraction to Kelly. And then arguably came Kelly's mistake. She laughed at him. Then, to compound the hurt he must have felt, Kelly went off to have sex with Vallender in her bedroom. Very upset and rejected, Rowan Davis did what any right-thinking person would do. He went to film them having sex using his mobile phone through a gap in the door. As you do again. When Vallender and Kelly were done, Vallender and Rowan Davis left Kelly's home. Vallender went his own way, while Rowan Davis was ostensibly left to lick his wounds and mull over the sense of failure and rejection he felt. I have some sympathy for how he felt, but what he chose to do next was just sick and abhorrent. Rather than going home and having a good cry into his pillow, yes, I speak from very macho experience, he decided to go back to Kelly's home. You've already got a bad feeling about this, haven't you? You'd be right to be fair. Now, we don't accurately know what happened next, and I'll discuss what most likely happened when I look at the forensics later. But we do know that Kelly was bound, most likely tortured, and had her throat slit before her home was set alight. Kelly was found dead in her kitchen by firefighters after fire and rescue teams were called to reports of a house blaze. She was naked, and her arms were still bound with cable ties. Neighbour Samantha Archer said that she had been eating breakfast with her children when they heard the sound of sirens. She said, "I was sorting their breakfast in the morning and we could hear sirens about 8:30. I went outside about an hour before that because the cover of our pool had blown off and I could smell burning really strongly. There was a woman who was upset and saying that this fire was a crime." Naturally, upon finding a body that was clearly the victim of a homicide, a murder investigation was launched. It didn't take long for the police to round on Valander and Rowan Davis. Now, Brendan Rowan Davies has an IQ of 55. That's not intended as a criticism. I mention it as it meant that he was less likely to be equipped for a police interview. And as such, he created a story which, as well as being implausible, also put him at the scene at the time of the crime. He told police he had been with Kelly and Valinder earlier at the home, but after leaving, he needed to return to collect some tobacco that he'd left behind. When he returned to the home, he said that when he went inside and upstairs at the house, a person put a knife to his throat from behind, and he saw Kelly dead on her bed with an injury to her throat. There was no evidence that another person had been at the scene. Following an investigation by Hampshire Constabulary's Major Crime Team, 29-year-old Rowan Davies was charged with murder and arson. The case came to trial at Winchester Crown Court in early 2020, and it was there that the details of what had happened to Kelly were laid bare. Forensic expert Jessica Adby, upon giving evidence, told the court her interpretation of the findings, saying, "In my opinion, the offender was on the bed when she received her injuries. The bed takes up most of the space in the room, so the individual was likely to be on the bed when she received the injuries to her neck." Miss Adby confirmed that the evidence pointed to Kelly not being upright when she was attacked. Asked whether the offender could have had blood staining, Miss Adby said, "With stabbings, it's not inevitable that the offender is blood-stained, so it's not possible to tell whether they would have been blood-stained as a result of their actions. However, blood on bed fabric suggested that it, meaning the body, had been moved from upstairs to downstairs. There were also indications that the attacker had moved through the hallway. In terms of whether blood staining indicated if a knife had been the weapon used, Miss Adby said, "It is difficult to tell what object was used without doing direct comparisons." William Mosley, QC, prosecuting, had told the jury that the motive for the attack appeared to be sexual, and the defendant had mutilated Kelly's body after killing her. Mosley said the victim had been alone and vulnerable when she was killed. He said that a post-mortem showed her throat had been cut several times, which would have caused catastrophic blood loss. In addition, she had 8 shallow wounds above the collarbone, a 9-centimeter stab wound to the back of the right shoulder, and another 2-centimeter wound. Mosley said, "These have the appearance of someone wanting to control or coerce or terrify Kelly. So perhaps she would do what she was being told." He said she had also sustained rib fractures that were consistent with CPR. Mosley said, "It could be that the killer did at some point attempt CPR, but if that was a change of heart, it came too late after a savage attack." Rowan Davis, who had previous convictions for burglary, was seen to burn items of clothing and dispose of other items, including women's underwear he had taken from Kelly's home for his own sexual titillation. Mr. Mosley said DNA matches to the defendant and the victim were found on some of the clothing and on one of the cable ties, as well as a sample taken away from Kelly's body. On Tuesday, the 4th of February 2020, he was convicted by a jury of both offences, the murder and the arson, following the trial at Winchester Crown Court. When the jury's guilty verdicts were announced, at that point, Brendan Rowan Davis simply shook his head, while gasps and cries of "yes" could be heard from the public gallery. He was jailed the same day by the Honourable Mr. Justice Garnham for life with a minimum term of 30 years. Justice Garnham said, "You have been convicted on overwhelming evidence of the murder of Kelly Ann Case and of arson at her home. This was a truly dreadful crime." Mr. Justice Garnham also said that the murder had involved a sexual sadistic motive and added, "She was vulnerable and defenseless. She was completely at your mercy, and you showed her none." In a statement read in court, Kelly's family branded Rowan Davis a sick, vile and depraved excuse of a human being who committed a heinous and senseless crime. Kelly's mother, Caroline Tebb, said in a statement that her daughter was brutally and sadistically taken by a sick, vile excuse of a human being. This oxygen thief has not only deprived me of a daughter, but he also took a mother, a sister, an aunt, a cousin, a granddaughter, and a friend. Kelly was an attractive, young, straight-talking, independent woman. She will be sadly missed by those who truly knew her. Following the sentencing, Senior Investigating Officer Detective Inspector Toby Elcock said, "This was a horrific and planned attack on a young woman, and our thoughts remain with Miss Case's children, friends, and family. The defendant's denials have meant that the people closest to Kelly have had to endure the stresses of the trial process. But I hope the verdicts returned by the jury today will help them start to move forward from this. I would like to thank those whose help throughout the investigation and the subsequent trial that has resulted in Rowan Davis being brought to justice." Brendan Rowan Davis's defence team launched an appeal. He was not appealing the conviction for murder and arson. Rather, his appeal centres on the trial judge's finding that the murder was sadistic. Seems pretty clear to me, but what do I know? Such killings see a starting sentence of 30 years, when a judge has ruled to the criminal standard of proof of being sure that the murder was sadistic. This is opposed to the civil standard of more likely, which cannot be used to make the finding for sentencing. In sentencing in the February, Mr. Justice Garnham told the killer, "Either you obtained pleasure from inflicting wounds on Miss Case before you went on to kill her, in which case it was sadistic in motivation, or you inflicted pain to persuade her to have sex with you and killed her when she refused. The former is more likely, and what I find occurred." Howard Barrington Clark, whose Corsham-based firm Wessex Solicitors represented Rowan Davis, said, "The jury says whether someone is guilty of murder. The judge decides if it is of a sadistic or sexual nature. and there the judge has to be satisfied to the criminal standard of proof. Here in this case, the judge said, yes, it's sadistic or sexual, and said it's more likely that it was sadistic, therefore 30 years. Him saying more likely is way below the criminal standard of proof. The Court of Appeal confirmed that the case was lodged and was being prepared, but as far as I can tell is yet to be looked at by a senior judge who will decide if the appeal has merit and can proceed to a full hearing. I have found no updates since the appeal was lodged, so I can only assume that no decision has yet been made, but I will provide any updates as and when they become available. And that was the hideous case of the death of Kellyanne Case at the hands of someone who, maybe not a close friend, was at least well known to her. I appreciate he was hurting from rejection, but there is nothing that can justify murder, especially where there has been additional cruelty and torture. I wish I knew what makes some people act in this way. I suspect I will never fully understand this kind of aberrant behaviour, and I'm not sure I'd want to be able to understand it, if I'm being honest. This video is of course dedicated to Kellyanne Case. She was at a point in her life where she was in a very vulnerable state and was relying on substances to help her to cope. This in itself does not make her a bad person, just perhaps flawed. While her children did not live with her at the time of her murder, she was still a mother, and now 3 children do not have a mother, and I send my sympathies to them. I hope Kellyanne has now found the tranquility that seemed out of her reach during her life. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve. As you saw a couple of minutes ago, Samson clearly must have had a better offer, so he's gone swanning off. But in his absence, I will say once again, I'm Steve, and I'll see you when I see you.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that